Hey, welcome back to Starbound. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It's free and it helps make the channel grow. Comment down below in the comment section. Follow us wherever you can. And enjoy the 2 stories per day. The ground transport jolted as Ash crossed the tarmac for the starport of Thalon 4, a mining planet shrouded in perpetual haze. Ash, a bounty hunter, steadied his grip on the railing, fingers grazing over the blood caked on his gloves, still fresh from the last job. It had been a close call this time, messy, tense, and far more chaotic than the intel had suggested. But close calls were just another part of the job, and over the years he'd learned to take them in stride. He adjusted the hood over his head, shadowing his face as he prepared to disembark. Through the transport's open hatch, a wave of sulfur-heavy air greeted him, thick and choking as it poured into the cramped hold. Outside, the landscape stretched in every direction, barren and bleak, a world stripped of its resources and left raw and empty. Even from this distance, he could see the heavy machinery still at work, its groaning, ceaseless grind a fitting anthem for the miners who called this place home. It was a grim sight, barely a patch of green for miles, just endless swaths of brown and gray under a perpetually dim sky. His mission was over, and he wanted nothing more than to leave this wasteland behind. But for bounty hunters like him, rest was a luxury, always just out of reach. He moved swiftly through the port, slipping through the crowds like a shadow. Although, even among hardened miners and mercenaries, he stood out. A figure of controlled intensity, face obscured, his stride carrying the weight of 100 fights won and lost. Though bounty hunters weren't uncommon in a port like this, a human bounty hunter was a rarity here on the edge of Terran space, and stares followed him as he passed. Ash kept moving, ignoring the curious glances and muttered words that rose in his wake. His destination was the loading area, where the next transport would take him away from this world of endless dirt and ash, bound for the remote space known as Outpost Zeta. Outpost Zeta. To most, it was a dark, lawless way station on the edge of civilized space, a place where reputations were won and lost in the time it took to draw a weapon. For him, it was simply the last stop before whatever job came next, a place where he could lose himself in the burn of a strong drink, the dull throb of music, and, if he was lucky, a few hours of silence to mourn his recent loss. After securing a spot on the transport, he slumped back in the cramped seat, eyes half shut as the engine rumbled to life. The familiar ache of exhaustion pulled at him, deep and unrelenting. The past few missions had run him ragged. Close calls, intel that never seemed to add up, injuries that never had time to heal. All the while, he carried that empty space with him, a constant reminder of who should have been there. His hand drifted to the pocket of his coat, fingers brushing the familiar shape of a fabric neckpiece, worn and frayed at the edges. It was all he had left of her now. Once, that neckpiece had been bright red, its color gleaming against her dark complexion, the little silver heart engraved with her name. She'd worn it proudly, carrying it through every adventure, every wild chase and quiet moment. But now it was faded, as if all the memories it held had slowly bled away with time, leaving only a muted echo of what once was. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, letting memories of her wash over him. The transport's engines rumbled, drowning out the sounds of the port as the ship lifted off, rising through the thick atmosphere until they broke free into the silence of open space. Outside the viewport, stars dotted the endless expanse, each one cold and indifferent. In his mind's eye, he saw her running through fields back on Terra, her eyes bright and eager as if every moment was a new adventure. She had been his constant, his anchor, the one who had waited for him after every mission. Her excitement never dampened, no matter how long he'd been away. And in those quiet, stormy nights when he'd been battered and worn, she'd been there, a steady presence by his side. But now she was gone. Her absence gnawed at him, a hollow ache that had become as familiar as the scars they bore. No matter how many jobs he took or how many light years he traveled, nothing dulled that ache, that feeling of having left a piece of himself behind. The journey to Outpost Zeta was short, and soon enough the hulking, dark silhouette of the station loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and glass set against a cold void. Ash stared at it, his gaze hardening. Outpost Zeta was a place of last calls and loose ends, where grudges were settled and loyalty was a rare currency. It suited him, he thought. A place as cold and unyielding as the emptiness he carried. The ship docked with a low shudder, and he filed out, blending into the steady flow of passengers disembarking. Even here, among mercenaries, bounty hunters, and spacers, he felt eyes lingering on him. Ash was an anomaly, cold, silent, and carrying an intensity that seemed to ripple in his wake. He moved through the docking bay with his head down, heading directly for the cantina where he knew he could drown himself in quiet and drink. The cantina was dim and smoky, filled with the low murmur of voices and the occasional clink of glasses. Figures huddled in booths and crowded around the bar, rough-edged beings from every corner of the galaxy, each of them lost in their own shadows. Ash slipped into the crowd, ordering a drink and finding a quiet corner near the back, away from the curious stares. As he took his first sip, his hand drifted to the neckpiece again, fingers tracing its worn, soft edges. This ritual had become part of his life, each drink a silent tribute, each sip a memory of her loyalty, her boundless love. She had been there for him in ways no one else ever could, and each night in places like this, he honored her memory, her life, in whatever way he could. The drink burned as it went down, and for a brief moment it dulled the ache, softening the edges of the emptiness inside. He closed his eyes, letting the memories wash over him. Her quiet footsteps in the background, her nudging his hand when she sensed his sadness, the warmth of her curled up beside him on long, lonely nights. But here, in the harsh, dim light of Outpost Zeta, those memories felt like distant stars, bright but untouchable, lost in a past that no longer felt real. She was gone, and with her, a part of him had died too. Ash opened his eyes, blinking away the sting. In a place like this, grief was weakness, something to be hidden and buried. But he kept the neck piece close, a reminder of who he had once been, and of the one soul who had never let him down. Tonight, he would drink to her memory, as he had every night since she'd been gone. He set the glass down, glancing around the cantina. There were fights to be had, jobs to be taken, old grudges simmering just below the surface. In this world where life was cheap and loyalty was scarce, he had become something else, something forged by loss and sharpened by vengeance. Soon enough, he was joined by 3 others, acquaintances he had made in the months on the station, and they settled in after their recent missions. The Gray sat calmly, their large almond-shaped eyes absorbing every nuance of the surroundings. Communication for them was a blend of telepathic whispers and occasional scribbles on a digital pad. Their curiosity about other cultures was insatiable, particularly when it came to humans. Opposite them, a Saranai reclined with an air of regal detachment. Their scaled skin glinted under the cantina lights, and their eyes held the wisdom of a species that valued honor above all else. To the Saranai, respect was reserved for equals. Lastly, a Virexian leaned forward, their exoskeleton clicking softly against the cantina furniture. Blunt and unapologetic, they carried themselves with the confidence of one who never doubted their place at the top of the food chain. To them, the weak were simply stepping stones for the strong. I had a rough job this time, Ash remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. Ash leaned back, the muscles in his shoulders tensed despite the effort to relax. This one, he began, voice low. It was supposed to be clean, a quick retrieval job, but nothing went as planned. The target was holed up in an old mining colony, one of those places where they strip everything down to nothing and leave it a wasteland. He paused, taking a breath, almost as if feeling the polluted atmosphere in his lungs again. It was empty, at least at first. But as soon as I got close, everything went sideways. Turns out the Mark had paid some local mercs to lay low around the hideout, just waiting for someone to come sniffing around. Wouldn't you guess who the lucky dumbass was that did that? Spent hours dealing with them, weaving through a barren wasteland with only a few rocks for cover, dust so thick you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. The whole place stunk. It wasn't fun, then? The Virexian probed. No, quite literally the whole place stunk. It has a high sulfur content in the atmosphere. Ash shook his head. The whole thing felt wrong from the beginning. Every time I thought I had taken them all out, more would come from the haze. Ash's gaze drifted off as he spoke, as if he were still back there, running the fight over in his mind. By the time I finally reached the target, I was almost out of ammo and fucks to give. The bounty was dead or alive. He paused, letting out a slow breath, his eyes focusing back on the present, glancing at the silent faces around him. And then? The Virexian asked. What do you think? I ended it right there. Got my scan and off that stinking planet. The Gray sensed an opportunity to cut in. Its thoughts brushed gently against the group's minds. Fascinating how our paths continue to converge in this vast galaxy. So many cultures, so many perspectives, so much to understand. Ash smiled. The universe can be funny about bringing beings together. The Virexian scoffed lightly. We are together because we are strong. We are survivors. Strength is all that matters. The Saranai's eyes narrowed slightly. There is strength in understanding, too, Virexian. The Gray sensed an opportunity. Speaking of understanding, I've been curious about a particular human practice. Pets, I believe they're called? Ash's expression softened imperceptibly, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. Pets, huh? That's a topic I haven't discussed in a while. The Gray's inquisitive gaze held on Ash, the large dark eyes radiating a genuine curiosity that felt almost tangible in its quiet persistence. Yes, pets. The Gray's thoughts brushed against the group's minds, their mental voice gentle yet insistent. Companions rather than necessities. You must explain this, human. They tilted their head, delicate fingers tapping thoughtfully on their tablet. Our reports are lacking. It seems our first attempt to secure pets went astray. I struggle to understand the logic. There seems to be no practical purpose. Ash paused, caught off guard by the question, but oddly touched by the interest. He took a breath, his gaze drifting back to the swirling liquid in his glass as if it held the key to a distant memory. Practical purpose. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. No, not always. It's not about practicality. Pets are... He trailed off, searching for the right words. They're family. The Saranai's feathers shifted, a subtle indication of confusion. Family? They echoed, voice low and respectful, but tinged with disbelief. You equate lesser beings with kin? Ash smiled, a faint, almost wistful curve of his lips. Yeah, that's the thing about pets. They become part of you in a way. My dog. His voice softened as memories surfaced, a tenderness slipping through the tough exterior. She was clever, loyal, smarter than most people, honestly. Always seemed to know when I needed her. Needed her? The Virexian interrupted with a sharp, disbelieving chatter, eyes glinting in mock amusement. A creature that needs its own food provided has no claws or armor, and you needed it. Ash shot the Virexian a hard look but continued, undeterred. Yeah, she had this way of being there when things were rough, you know. After a long day, it's like she'd just know I needed her. Just being around her made things easier. The gray leaned forward, interest practically glowing in their eyes. So this bond, it's emotional? Mutual? They hesitated, then scribbled something quickly on their tablet. This is remarkable. Your species invests emotion in creatures that offer no tactical advantage, no immediate survival benefit. They simply exist by your side? Ash nodded, a faint smile lingering as he continued. It's not just about survival with pets. It's about trust, companionship. My dog, she'd go anywhere with me, face anything. And it wasn't because she had to. It's because she chose to. There's something incredible about that kind of loyalty. The Saranai tilted their head, the feathers on their crests rising and falling thoughtfully. Trust and loyalty are valued among my kind as well, they admitted slowly. But we value them among equals, those who can choose to earn respect through strength or wisdom. A lesser creature cannot comprehend such ideals, surely. Ash gave a soft chuckle, as if understanding the Saranai's view. I know it's hard to explain, he said, leaning back with a faraway look in his eyes. But with a pet, it's like they're a part of you, even if they're not as wise or strong by your standards. They give love freely. Maybe that's what makes it so powerful. The Virexian scoffed, folding his arms with a dismissive sneer. Love is for the weak. Strength is the only true currency. I can hardly see how pampering a lesser being does anything but waste time and energy. A pet, they made a harsh clicking sound of disdain, would be useless in the field, unable to defend itself or contribute in any meaningful way. They would only slow you down. Ash's smile faded slightly, a flash of something unreadable crossing his face. Maybe to you, Virexian, but humans have a different way of looking at things. The Gray's thoughts returned, a soft mental hum of interest. Fascinating. And yet, human, despite their perceived weaknesses, you invest in them, emotionally, and perhaps even more. Ash nodded slowly. There's something pure about the connection between man and dog. His eyes softened as he spoke. She was a great dog. More than that, actually. She was loyal, fearless even. There was a time one night years ago. It was so cold outside. There was a storm raging. I was still just a kid, maybe my late teens. We were living on some farmland, no neighbors, nothing to separate us from the wild. He paused, his thumb running along the side of his glass as if tracing an invisible pattern. The power had gone out, and I remember hearing this strange howling from beyond the fields, like a predator prowling too close for comfort. I didn't know what it was, maybe just a wind howling through the trees, maybe something real. Either way, she took off, ready to rip whatever beast was lurking out there to shreds. Ash's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. I ran after her, yelling her name, but the storm swallowed my voice. She was gone all night. I sat there by the door the whole time, outside, freezing, thinking she was lost out there, being devoured, and I'd never see her again. He fell silent for a moment, his hand still on his glass, mind light years away. But just before dawn, she came back, covered in mud, her fur matted and tangled, but she had in her mouth the leg of a coyote. How she got it, who knows, but she brought it back as proof. My little bounty hunter. Ash shook his head, a quiet laugh escaping him. I did scold her, told her she was crazy, but she just stood there wagging her tail with that victorious look. A moment of silence lingered as he finished, a faint, sad smile tugging at his lips. He didn't look at anyone in particular, his gaze lost in the space between memories. The Saranai observed this quietly, their crests dipping thoughtfully. For a lesser being to exhibit loyalty so unfaltering, it is not what I would expect. They inclined their head, feathers rippling in a sign of reluctant respect. The Virexian flexed his antenna, shaking its head.
Weakness disguised as loyalty, more likely. Your dog had no other options. Relying on you was a survival instinct. It probably found that leg, nothing more. In our world, loyalty is earned through strength, through proof of one's ability to stand alone.
They waved a hand dismissively.
If a pet cannot defend itself, what value can it truly have?
Ash's eyes hardened, his fingers tightening around his glass, but he kept his voice calm. Maybe it's not about what they can do for you, Virexian. Maybe it's about what you're willing to give for them. The Gray observed the exchange, absorbing every word with fascination. This depth of connection, they mused, even with creatures not of equal standing, it is truly unique. Perhaps the value is not in the creature's abilities, but in the bond itself. Ash nodded slowly, his expression softening as he glanced at the Gray. Exactly. Pets don't ask for much, but they give everything in return. He leaned back, gaze distant, his thoughts still lingering on memories of his lost companion. She wasn't just a pet to me. She was family. Silence fell over the group as each member digested Ash's words in their own way. The Gray looked thoughtful, intrigued by the emotional bond described, while the Saranai inclined their head in silent acknowledgement. Only the Virexian remained unmoved, their eyes hinting at faint amusement, clearly still skeptical of the value of such a connection. The Virexian hissed in a mocking manner, their mandibles moving rhythmically as they started into a tale, clearly relishing the attention of their companions.
I've encountered one of these strange dog creatures.
They began with a hint of amusement.
It was quite ridiculous. I met it on Terra. It was during a mission, a simple reconnaissance, gathering information near one of those rural human outposts.
They let out what could pass as a dry, rattling chortle, antenna twitching as they recalled the encounter.
I just crossed over into what they call a residential area, a quiet place, nothing but small dwellings and their peculiar flora. I expected no trouble. Humans themselves weren't even a concern there. But as I moved through an empty yard, something intercepted me. This small, furred creature, barking as if it could somehow stand in my way.
Ash's hand clenched imperceptibly, but he kept its expression neutral, listening as the Virexian continued.
It was tiny, barely up to my knee.
The Virexian said with a sneer.
Its coat was rough, dark fur with spots of lighter color on its nose and face. It looked like a little masked bandit. It had this worn collar around its neck attached to a broken chain. I thought it might recognize me as something to be feared, but it seemed more stubborn than sensible.
It moved its four arms in an alien approximation of a shrug.
It was strange, really. Most creatures on Terra either freeze or flee, but this thing stood its ground, barking its head off, baring its teeth like I was some threat it could handle.
Ash's gaze sharpened, but he said nothing, letting the Virexian's words wash over him, each detail striking close to something too familiar.
It kept pacing in front of me,
the Virexian continued,
as if it had some territory to protect. Its eyes, those small, dark eyes, never wavered, even though it must have known it couldn't possibly win. It was just standing there, growling like it had any chance of intimidating me.
It shook its head, letting out a dry hiss of amusement.
It's laughable, really. That tiny beast, barely more than a mouthful, posturing like it mattered.
Beside them, the gray tilted their head, intrigued by the description. Did it attack? They asked telepathically, a faint spark of amusement echoing in their thought.
Oh, it tried,
the Virexian said with a dismissive click.
Eventually, it lunged at me, all teeth and noise like a tiny furry whirlwind. It actually caught me by surprise for a moment. The audacity of the thing. But when it got close enough...
They paused, a dark satisfaction gleaming in their multifaceted eyes.
I put an end to its foolish display. One shot, and it was gone. A mercy, really. Weakness has no place in this galaxy.
Ash's grip on his glass had tightened to the point that his knuckles had turned white. As the Virexian story sank in, images began flashing unbidden in his mind, of a small, scrappy dog with a rough, dark coat and a red collar worn from years of adventures. She'd always had a stubborn streak, that fierce little dog, standing up to things much larger than herself, barking with all the bravado of something 100 times her size. The gray, noting the shift in Ash's demeanor, sent a playful thought their way, still oblivious to the true weight of the story. Ah, human, does this upset you? To think, a Terran creature challenging one so much greater, knowing it had no chance. It's an amusing thought, is it not? Ash said nothing, his face a mask of cold restraint. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing against something small, familiar, and worn. With a deliberate movement, he pulled out a collar, the fabric faded and weathered, but the tag still intact, glinting faintly under the cantina lights. He held it up, fixing the Virexian with a gaze as cold as ice. The collar, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, taut with barely contained fury. Did it look like this? The Virexian sat in shock, taken aback for a moment, and the Grey's playful candor faltered as they realized the gravity of the moment. For Ash, there was no longer any doubt. The fierce, loyal creature he had known so well had stood her ground, bravely facing down a creature far beyond her strength, because she'd loved her owner, and she'd died defending her property. Ash's grip tightened around the worn collar, his eyes locked on the Virexian with a growing, dangerous intensity. You shot my dog? He asked, voice low, each word laced with barely restrained fury. The Virexian tilted their head, mandibles moving with casual disdain. It was just a beast, they replied, shrugging as though the memory held no weight. A weak thing, nothing more. Sentiment is wasted on such creatures. Ash's face grew taut, his jaw clenched as memories flashed through his mind, loyal eyes looking up at him, paws racing through grass, an unbreakable spirit that had always been at their side, her bark fierce even when faced with something far bigger than herself. That collar, once bright, had seen every adventure, every joyful reunion, every night spent close by, comforting each other. She'd been family. The Virexian continued, oblivious.
Your attachment is foolish. Strength lies in survival, not sentiment. If it could not protect itself, it deserved its fate.
Ash's breathing grew steady, his gaze cold as stone. Every word from the Virexian cut deeper, only fueling the growing fire inside him. His hand clenched so tightly around the collar that his knuckles went white, every muscle in his body tense, ready. And then, from across the table, the gray shifted, glancing towards Ash with the barest flicker of curiosity in their dark eyes. Their voice slipped into Ash's mind, quiet, almost a murmur. To lose something irreplaceable. It's a feeling one never quite forgets, isn't it? The words stuck in his mind, barely more than a breath, but it was enough. Ash's gaze darkened, something fierce and raw flashing behind his eyes. He stood, the air around him thick with tension as he locked eyes with the Virexian, the collar clutched tightly in his fist. The room went silent. Every patron sensing the storm about to break, all eyes drawn to the unspoken challenge in that deadly stare. The Virexian, finally realizing the shift, straightened, mandibles clicking in anticipation, joy spreading across its features.
You really want to do this?
The Virexian sneered, but Ash's only response was a cold, steady look, his fury barely contained. In the stillness, the gray leaned back with a faint, satisfied look. The quiet nudge they'd given settling like smoke in the air. Their part in this matter was, complete. Ash didn't wait another second. The collar still clutched tightly in his hand, he launched forward, all hesitation evaporating into raw, unyielding rage. His fist connected with the Virexian's jaw, a crack that echoed through the cantina and turned every head. The Virexians staggered, taken off guard, but quickly steadied themselves, a low hiss escaping their throat. They swiped at Ash with bladed arms, but Ash ducked, responding with a swift elbow to the Virexian's thorax. The impact forced a sharp, startled hiss from the Virexian.
You want to talk about strength?
Ash growled, his voice ragged, almost feral.
I'll show you what it looks like.
The Virexian retaliated, landing a brutal strike across Ash's shoulder, sharp blades tearing through fabric and flesh alike. Blood began to soak through the torn material, but Ash barely flinched, eyes blazing with fury as he took a step back, sizing up his opponent. With a flicker of amusement, the Gray leaned toward the Saranai, their telepathic voice threaded with fascination. Remarkable, isn't it? This intensity, all for a lost pet. The Saranai's feathers bristled, their gaze locked on Ash. It's something more. It's vengeance, fierce, unyielding, a force stronger than any law of survival. Ash seized a nearby metal mug from the table and brought it down hard across the Virexian's face. The sound was wet and heavy, a spray of bluish blood spattering across the floor. The Virexian snarled, swiping at Ash's torso, the blades digging deep, but Ash barely registered the pain. Instead, he brought the mug down again and again, each blow harder, each impact fueled by rage and heartbreak. The Virexian finally managed to knock Ash back, their mandibles twitching as they spat.
You fight for something that is dead, human. This is madness.
Madness. Ash spat out a mouthful of blood and straightened, face cut and bruised, but eyes unyielding. No, this is justice. The Virexian lunged, teeth bared, but Ash was faster. He grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor, bringing it up just in time to block the attack, driving the splintered wood into the Virexian's exoskeleton. The Virexian let out a strangled hiss, stumbling back as her eyes shone in shock and pain. Even wounded, they're relentless. The Grey observed with a quiet, morbid fascination, their voice touching the Saranai's mind. Humanity's capacity for, what did you call it, vengeance? It's extraordinary. The Saranai watched, silent and somber. This is a fierce loyalty, they murmured. A loyalty that drives them beyond pain, even beyond reason. Ash took a step forward, breathing heavily, blood seeping from fresh cuts along his arms and face. The Virexian swiped again, but this time Ash caught their arm and twisted it sharply, a sickening crack resounding through the room. The Terran pulled the arm free. The Virexian let out a howl, stumbling as Ash's fist followed, smashing into their mouth with a force that shattered their mandibles.
You took away the one thing that mattered,
Ash snarled, his voice hoarse.
You killed her for nothing.
He then beat the Virexian with its own severed arm. Each strike was fueled by grief and fury, a relentless onslaught that the Virexian, though initially stronger, could no longer keep up with. Blood dripped from both of them, pooling onto the floor, staining everything in their path. The Virexian, wheezing, took one last desperate swing, managing to tear a deep gash along Ash's cheek. But Ash barely flinched, too far gone to care about pain. Instead, he grabbed the Virexian by the shoulders and shoved them backward, slamming them against a wall with enough force to dent the metal.
Tell me,
Ash demanded, voice low and trembling with rage.
Did she look at you as you shot her down? Did you feel strong?
The Virexian coughed, blue blood spilling down their chin, but managed a sneer.
She was nothing,
they rasped, eyes glinting with defiance. Ash's face hardened, his eyes dark and unwavering. He grabbed a bottle from a nearby table, shattering it against the edge, and advanced with the jagged glass in hand. In that moment, every muscle in his body, every scar and bruise seemed to resonate with unbreakable resolve. He raised the broken bottle, ready to strike the final blow. The Virexian's eyes widened, a flicker of fear finally crossing their face, but Ash didn't hesitate. He was beyond rage, beyond grief. This was justice, a reckoning that would leave no doubt of the price paid for the cold-blooded murder of his companion. Ash didn't hesitate as he brought down the broken bottle, driving it straight into the Virexian's chest. The jagged glass tore through chitin, a final brutal blow that left the Virexian lifeless, slumping to the ground with a fading hiss, blue blood pooling beneath them. Ash stood over the Virexian's lifeless form, chest heaving, blood and sweat mingling on the bruised skin. Around them, the cantina was still, every patron watching the scene with a mixture of shock and cold acceptance. This was a place where life and death were decided in moments, where grudges were settled without ceremony. The Grey, observing from their seat, felt a thrill ripple through them, their dark eyes almost gleaming. So much ferocity, all over a single creature, they thought, excitement and a tinge of apprehension blending as they catalogued every detail of Ash's relentless fury. How fascinating. They truly are as dangerous as they are loyal. Beside them, the Saranai stared, stunned and silent, his crest feathers lowered in a rare display of respect. His kind held honor in high regard, and while the display was grotesque, he couldn't deny the strength behind it. The Virexian had violated a bond, one that he too might not fully understand but could respect. And in this world, debts were paid in blood. The Virexian, in the end, had simply gotten what was coming to him. Ash took a steadying breath, letting the collar slip into his pocket once more, hands now empty but still clenched with the weight of what had just happened. He looked down at the Phyrexians' broken form, the cold anger in their eyes unwavering. "That was for my dog," he said, each word hard and unyielding as he took a drink. Around them, several patrons nodded in silent approval, some murmuring in agreement, raising their glasses in respect. In a place where loyalties ran deep and grudges were dealt with swiftly, no one questioned to the rightness of what had happened. The Phyrexian had crossed a line, and here, among bounty hunters, you reaped what you sowed. Word of the incident spread quickly across the galaxy, though, slipping through interstellar trade routes and whispered over quiet drinks in distant cantinas. The story grew with every retelling. A Phyrexian who had disrespected a human's loyalty, treating their bond with the creature called a dog as worthless. The tale ended with the Phyrexian's brutal demise at the hands of Ash, exacting a final, bloody revenge. To many, the story was absurd. A deadly confrontation over a simple animal, surely there was more to it. But to those who had seen the aftermath, it became something of a legend, an unsettling reminder of a truth that many alien species had yet to fully understand. Among Saranai circles, the tale took on a cautionary tone, shared between veterans and young warriors alike. "You don't threaten what a human calls theirs," they would mutter. "They're not like us. They'll go to lengths you wouldn't expect for a creature you dismiss." The Saranai's sense of honor may have been different from Ash's loyalty, but after that fight, they respected the bond humans carried, even with the most unlikely of companions. The Phyrexians, for their part, were slower to take heed, but even they began to learn to tread carefully around Terrans, at least when it came to matters of loyalty. The story of the Phyrexian bounty hunters' downfall spread even to their distant colonies, repeated in hushed tones. In time, younger Phyrexian warriors would think twice before treating a Terran's bond with contempt, muttering, "Never threaten a human's pet," as if it were some ancient warning. The Grey, as ever, were fascinated by the tale. One of their observers even compiled an account of the incident, a detailed report sent back to their kin. In calm, methodical detail, it recounted Ash's reaction, the unexpected fury, and the aftermath of the fight. Yet, beneath the clinical observations, there was an undertone of grudging respect. "We have often looked at humans as curious, emotionally driven creatures," the observer wrote. "This incident reveals a depth of loyalty we rarely see, a drive to avenge, protect, and honor what they hold dear, even at great personal cost. It is a loyalty that transcends logic, fueled by an unyielding bond. Those who seek to understand humans must first understand this: they are not driven by reason alone. Their bonds, however strange, are never to be crossed." The observer's report circulated quietly among the Grey, each of them absorbing the new knowledge, adding it to their growing understanding of human nature. Among the Grey, the incident became a quiet but important reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed, a lesson that would shape their future dealings with Terrans. Across the galaxy, the tale settled into legend, the kind of story that made aliens glance twice at a human's companion, a silent reminder of the price of underestimating a human's loyalty. "Don't mess with a Terran's family," they would mutter, "especially if that family's got 4 legs." And in darkened bars and far-off colonies, the warning echoed, "Never, ever threaten a human's pet."